Shalom. Hello, this is Dr. Jonathan Ben-Tovish. This is again in connection with God's Physics book and Scientific Revolution. The book was published by iUniverse.com and is being translated into different languages. It follows 80 plus scientific articles that have been published, including now a special issue, a third special issue that came out by the Journal of Theoretical and Computational Physics, and it signifies no doubt a major scientific revolution in science, in 21st century science and theoretical physics, akin to the revolution or the paradigmatic shift that took place about 100 years ago with Einstein's general theory of relativity, and specifically the validation of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Today's, which is again equivalent to the scientific validation or empirical validation that has taken place already about this new scientific paradigm of God's physics. I spoke about it in previous presentations, but essentially we stand now at a historic point in which this new God's physics paradigm is already accepted and has been already validated scientifically, empirically, based on two specific, unique, critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm, which have been proven to be more valid than the corresponding predictions of the old paradigm, the old, what I call material causal paradigm of Einstein's relativity theory, which relates to the macroscopic universe, and quantum mechanics, which relates to the microscopic universe. That old paradigm of material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, their predictions have been shown to be less valid than the unique prediction of God's physics paradigm, both about the non-continuous accelerated expansion of the universe, and regarding what's called the proton radius puzzle. Today's talk is a very exciting and it's a very holy day for the Jewish people and for the whole world. This is the passing day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the RASHBI, one of the greatest sages, Jewish sages, and the RASHBI's passing on this day, Lag BaOmer, is a great holy day. The RASHBI brought to the world, to the Jewish people and to the whole world, the sacred Zohar, and in later years it's been now passed through Chabad, through the Alter Rebbe, Tanya, Holy Tanya book, and then the whole writings and teachings of Chabad, led by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which is the leader of the Jewish people. This day is a very special day, and I want to speak about the in Jewish faith and tradition and knowledge. Every generation has a leader that is, in a sense, a spark from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Moses, and the RASHBI has been one of those leaders, one of those sparks of Moshe Rabbeinu, and obviously the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader of the Jewish people, Melech HaMashiach. He is the spark and the leader of the Jewish people, and I want to speak today about this special day and about how God's physics new paradigm, exactly as the Lubavitcher Rebbe has been calling us and teaching us all along, that Geulah, redemption and a perfected state of the world, is already here, that we only have to open our eyes and see that. And and I also want to mention the great Maimonides, the Rambam. We just finished, according to the Rebbe's instruction, we just finished now another round of studying the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, which is essentially all the first summary of all the mitzvot and halachot, all the injunctions and commandments for the Jewish people in terms of Torah observances, etc. And I mentioned that because there is a clear line, the same truth, the same eternal truth that the Jewish people was received in Mount Sinai with the Torah, the same truth and the inner teachings of that truth, the inner wisdom of that truth, which came down as the Zohar by the RASHBI, and came down to us in this generation as Chabad teachings, Chassidus teachings, the Tanya, and all the other sacred books that have been written following the Tanya, and all of the sacred writings of the Rebbe, etc. So this inner teaching, this inner wisdom, or the inner light within the Torah, it's been given to the Jewish people and to the whole world on Mount Sinai, and it's been passed from one generation to another. The thing is that, in a sense, the Rambam, Maimonides, the great eagle, as has been called, the Nesher Gadol, he actually opens the Mishneh Torah with the first commandment, which is to know that there exists this singular reality, divine reality, that gives rise and that creates and that sustains anything in the universe, and that nothing in the universe can exist without the presence and the compassionate life-giving of this divine reality of God. So the Rambam begins his Mishneh Torah with the first mitzvah, the first commandment, the first teaching for the Jewish people, and obviously for in a broader sense to the whole world, to know that there exists this divine God reality, and that it sustains and it is the basis for everything in the universe, and in the sense that nothing exists outside of this divine God reality. And the Rambam ends the Mishneh Torah with a prophecy and a knowledge about the Geulah, the perfected state of of humanity, of the Jewish people and humanity more generally, in which, as he writes, the knowledge of this singular, higher, divine God reality, that knowledge would be so openly known and openly discussed. And actually, he says that towards the perfection and culmination of humanity and the world, in the time and the state of Geulah. Geulah is a Jewish term denoting this perfected state of humanity towards which the whole progression, evolution, and creation, sustenance and evolution of the whole universe and humanity has been pre-planned. I'll talk about it in a second, but has been pre-planned to reach this perfected Geulah state. And the Rambam says that during this culminated and final stages of evolution of humanity and the universe, in Geulah, in the Geulah perfected state, the major preoccupation of humanity would be to discover and to know and to realize the knowledge of God, the knowledge of this singular reality, and that it would be so prevalent, it would be so openly known. In the same way, he says that water covers the whole of the ocean. In the same way, that's a metaphor, but in the same metaphorically, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of the oneness of life, the knowledge of the one reality, the singular reality of God, which is all goodness, which steers the world towards a perfected and a peaceful and a goodwill state of humanity. That would be the state of the world. And so, in a sense, the topic of today's talk, first it's dedicated obviously to the RASHBI, whose passing we're celebrating today, and that in and of itself is such an optimistic and a special message to the Jewish people and to the whole world. The RASHBI, that his teachings, in a sense, and again, it's the same today. It manifests through Chabad, through the Lubavitcher Rebbe's teachings. The major teachings of the inner truth of the Torah and of the RASHBI and of Chassidus, and what the Lubavitcher Rebbe has been calling us all the time to do is to open our eyes and see that Geulah is here. The major teaching is that really, and this is exactly what the Rambam has taught us, which I mentioned, that really there is nothing that is separate from this singular, higher, divine God reality. And so I want to open the talk with mentioning briefly how profound this God's physics revolution in science is. And again, I wrote this book, and it's now being translated to different languages, because the message of God's physics scientific revolution is not just for scientists. In fact, in a sense, the message of God's physics new scientific revolution is for the whole of humanity. And the exciting part, exactly by the way, as Chassidus has prophesied and has taught, that there will come a time in which scientific knowledge and the old and eternal knowledge of the Torah and of the inner aspects of the Torah, which is through Kabbalah, through the Zohar, through Chassidus, they will be unified. In a sense, science has reached a point in which it points and it, in a sense, teaches humanity exactly the same truth that has been taught all along and has been given to the Jewish people and to the whole world about the oneness of creation, about morality, about the oneness of God, and that the whole creation, as the Rambam says, Maimonides says, is inseparable from this divine reality. And the Rebbe is calling to all of us, to the Jewish people and to the whole of humanity, to live in accordance with this Geulah, to live and lead a moral life, to observe the seven Noach commandments for non-Jews, and for Jews to observe the Torah and all of its injunctions and mitzvot. So I want to open by highlighting, in a sense, what profound change science is undergoing and what profound change this instigates and is really aimed towards making a change in our understanding, in humanity's basic understanding of the universe, ourselves, and our special and very important role in the unfolding of Geulah. So let's just mention the fact that the old paradigm, I talked about it in previous presentations, that science is not a static reality. It's not a static knowledge that does not change. In fact, science has been given mandate by humanity to investigate truth, and to investigate it through experimentation, through theory, through different predictions, But in a sense, science, Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, is teaching us that science must undergo certain leaps and bounds, certain revolutions, because science, and I gave this metaphor previously, science could be likened, could be, there's an analogy or a metaphor that can be used to explain how science evolves and how science, in a sense, expands its gaze and understanding of the reality and its investigation of what is the truth behind the universe, what's the real reality underlying the universe. And that metaphor is, I said, imagine a person being born in a confined room, and all they know of the world is that confined room. And then after a while, they hear knocks on the door, or a beam of iron going through the wall, something disturbing their preconceived idea, their previous idea of the whole universe being just their room. And then they have to open the room, which is a little bit scary, obviously, because we human beings are not, at least initially, excited about changing our worldview and questioning what we've known so far. That's the challenge, by the way, what Thomas Kuhn is telling us, that's the big challenge of those paradigmatic shifts. In other words, when that person hears the knocks on the door, or has a iron beam going through the wall, they have to summon courage and open the door or break the wall and see what's outside that room, because they realize the room is not the whole reality. And that's a paradigmatic shift. They had a certain paradigm, a certain way of looking at the world. Thomas Kuhn called it a standard paradigm in science, let's say like Newtonian mechanics was a standard paradigm, a way of looking at the world with certain assumptions, etc. But then there's certain phenomena that are discovered, which reveal to us that that's not the whole reality, that we have to expand our gaze, and that we have to open the door and realize that beyond the confined room, there is a house. So the confined room is okay, it does exist, but it doesn't describe the whole reality. The whole reality in this case would be the house. And the room would be a special case, a special instance, or a confined instant within the broader understanding of the room. And then, of course, of the house. And then from the house to the neighborhood, to the state, to the nation, etc. So that progression, that expansion of our understanding and shifting from one paradigm to from a standard old paradigm, which would be the room, to a new paradigm which is broader and includes the old paradigm as a special case. That's the progression of knowledge in science. And Thomas Kuhn, who was a famous philosopher of science, also teaches us, as I said, that these leaps and bounds, which are inevitable because we cannot remain within the confined room, but those leaps and bounds in our understanding of the universe, they are challenging stages for science. Science eventually, and especially scientists, eventually have to overcome our innate fear from change and the unknown, because scientists are human beings just as you and I. We're all human beings, and we all share that natural innate tendency to hold on to the familiar. But that's not good enough, and especially for science and for scientists and for all of us, for all human beings, we ultimately are led to discover truth. And even if it means that it's uncomfortable at the beginning to open the door and find out that the room is not the whole reality, eventually and ultimately it's inevitable, that change, that expansion of knowledge, that a broader understanding of what the real reality behind the universe and what's the purpose of human life, that is an inevitable progression of humanity and of science. And I'm mentioning this because, in a sense, 100 years ago, when Einstein discovered general theory of relativity, first special theory of relativity and then general relativity theory, which made a huge revolution in science, that was an instance of, or an example of, that inevitable expansion of our understanding and of the science's understanding of the universe. So so now is perhaps the point to explain how these paradigmatic shifts occur in science. And briefly, what Thomas Kuhn is teaching us and what we've seen with Einstein, considered one of the two greatest geniuses and scientists the world has ever known. So Thomas Kuhn is telling us that when science is reaching that dead end, that confined room which has these knocks on the door or beams going through the wall, during those stages of a paradigmatic shift, in order for science and scientists eventually and ultimately to accept the broader paradigm, to open the room and see the bigger house within which the room exists. In order for that to happen, there are a few signs, alarming signs or symptoms, so to speak, of that paradigmatic shift, and ultimately the acceptance of the new broader paradigm necessitates what he calls a validation, empirical validation of a critical, unique prediction of the new paradigm. So the alarming signs are, we sort of implied that when you have the old paradigm, the beam going through the window or knocks on the door, are analogous to essentially phenomenon, first to a contradiction between the pillars of the old paradigm. For example, in the case of Newtonian mechanics, there was a contradiction between Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian theory, and in certain points they contradicted each other. So that's one alarming sign, and the other alarming sign is that you have certain key phenomena or phenomenon that cannot be explained by the old paradigm. In the case of Newtonian mechanics, that was the ether concept. The ether concept could not be explained by Newtonian mechanics. In other words, the experiments that were conducted to try and find out the ether, to detect the ether concept, which was essential for Newtonian mechanics, failed to do so. There was the famous Michelson-Morley experiment trying to detect the presence of the ether. And again, Newtonian mechanics is based on the assumption that the ether concept, which is essentially like a very fine element that was assumed to perfuse the whole universe. So Newtonian mechanics was based on the existence of the ether, the hypothetical existence of the ether. But when so many experiments were conducted and they failed to detect the ether concept, including the Michelson-Morley experiment, then that was an alarming sign. Because again, science has to stick and adhere to the scientific method, which means you have to test and verify anything that theory implies, including certain hypothetical concepts. Eventually, at least certain aspects or implications of these hypothetical concepts have to be verified empirically, experimentally. So when Michelson-Morley and many other scientists failed to verify and validate the existence of the ether concept, that was when Einstein, the great genius, came along, and very open-minded genius, came along, and he said that if the ether concept cannot be detected, then it has to be discarded. So these are, and then he of course brought some new postulates about relativity theory, and discarded the ether concept. And relativity theory was then verified, which I'll talk about in a second, as more valid than Newtonian mechanics, and then it included Newtonian mechanics as a special case, as a confined small room within the broader house. So in a sense, Thomas Kuhn is teaching us that when science reaches the limits of a certain paradigm, like the small room, before it opens the door, there are certain symptoms or signs, alarming signs. The contradiction between the pillars of the old paradigm. In the case of Newtonian mechanics, it was the contradiction between Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian theory, electromagnetic theory. The existence or the appearance of a major phenomena or phenomenon that cannot be explained by the old paradigm. In this case, it's the ether concept that could not be detected and had to be discarded. And then these are the alarming signs. And then in order to accept a new paradigm, the new paradigm has to first of all be able to explain and resolve the apparent contradictions between the pillars of the old paradigm, in this case Maxwellian Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian electromagnetic theory. And it has to also it has to in a sense offer an alternative explanation for that major phenomenon such as the ether concept. In the case of Einstein, he discarded the ether concept and he offered an alternative explanation for what the ether was standing for. And then the key turning point, or pivotal point at which science makes that leap, that metamorphosis, is when we find, identify, and validate a unique critical prediction of the new paradigm that is more valid than the corresponding predictions of the old paradigm. In the case of relativity theory, general relativity theory, Einstein was able to detect a unique case, a unique prediction or instance for which general relativity theory's prediction would be was validated eventually as more valid than the predictions of Newtonian mechanics. In the case of relativity theory, Einstein reasoned that since massive objects such as the sun are supposed to curve space-time, metaphor would be when we see a trampoline and we place a heavy mercury ball in the center of the trampoline sheath would be curved and sunken towards that heavy mercury ball. And we understand that if we toss now small marbles onto this trampoline sheath, they would encircle and gravitate towards that sunken middle part. That would be a metaphor for the curvature of space-time by massive objects, according to general theory of relativity. So Einstein reasoned out that since massive objects curve space and time, therefore the sun, for example, would curve space-time around it for the solar system, and Mercury, who is the closest planet orbiting around the sun, would be most affected by it. And so therefore he predicted that the perihelion pathway of Mercury around the sun would be very much curved, in fact twice as curved as what Newtonian mechanics predicted, 1.6 arc as opposed to 0.8 arc according to Newtonian mechanics. And then when Eddington, the famous British philosopher, verified that prediction, that unique critical prediction of relativity theory, when he verified that and validated that then signified the victory and the acceptance of relativity theory, general relativity theory, as more valid than the predictions of Newtonian mechanics. And in a sense, it signified the acceptance, despite the reluctance and despite the, as I said, as Thomas Kuhn is teaching us, the fear and apprehension of scientists to change their old paradigm into the new paradigm, which is broader. But when we get this direct empirical validation of the predictions of the new paradigm, in this case 20th century physics, that was relativity theory, when the predictions of relativity theory have been shown, a critical prediction about Mercury's double-valued perihelion pathway around the sun was shown to be more valid than Newtonian mechanics prediction, at that point in time, science had to embrace that change, had to accept the new paradigm. For 20th century, it was relativity theory, as including the special case of Newtonian mechanics. And I've brought this whole background explanation to point out the fact that right now we stand at exactly an equivalent point in which also the new God's physics paradigm has done and has accomplished precisely the same revolution as Einstein's general relativity theory has accomplished. In other words, first of all, God's physics paradigm has shown a way to resolve the apparent inconsistencies between relativity theory, talking about the macroscopic universe, and quantum mechanics relating to the microscopic universe. It has to do something about causality. I spoke about it in previous presentations, but essentially God's physics new paradigm was able to show that what seemed to contradict between relativity theory and quantum mechanics can be resolved through its major discovery of a singular higher ordered principle, the universal consciousness or computational principle, UCP. In religious terms we would call it the power of God, but in scientific terms, the discovery of this singular universal consciousness reality or principle, computational principle, UCP, which computes simultaneously every point in the universe, and in fact creates a series of universal frames at each trillionth of a second, that UCP creates and recreates the whole universe as a frame, as a universal three-dimensional frame, akin somewhat to film frames. So we have production of the whole universe simultaneously, three-dimensional frame, universal frame of the whole universe. Then it dissolves back into this UCP. Then it's created and reproduced somewhat larger than the previous frame. Excuse me. So we're seeing that God's physics discovery of this singular higher ordered universal consciousness principle or computational principle allows the God's physics new paradigm to resolve the apparent inconsistencies between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, allows God's physics new paradigm to explain a major phenomena, just like the ether concept, which was a very problematic concept because it couldn't be validated. Same way, there exists now for the past 20 years a very problematic concept of dark matter, dark energy, which cannot be validated. These are purely hypothetical concepts that are hypothesized or were hypothesized in a sense as an extension of general relativity theory to exist in order to explain the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. When we look at the galaxies, we see that they're drifting apart. They're running away from each other, and it happens, or it occurs at an accelerated rate, so it's increasing. And so the old model, relativity theory, cannot explain that accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. The only way it could explain that, or it tries to explain that, is by assuming that in addition to all the planets and stars and galaxies that we're seeing in the skies or in the universe, we need to have an additional 90% more mass and energy which cannot be detected. That's the only way that the old paradigm of relativity theory can explain that accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. So that's a very problematic concept and actually state for 21st century physics, because just like the ether concept, when we cannot find those dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts, and when they're assumed to comprise up to 90% of all the mass and energy in the universe, that's a problematic situation, and these are problematic concepts. And therefore, by the way, we've reached now the point where mainstream science and physics, Scientific American, the famous science journal, came out with 2 articles over the last 6 months. Essentially, one of them was The Last Stand of Dark Matter, Dark Energy, essentially telling us that science cannot continue to accept dark matter and dark energy as real concepts after 20 years of trying to detect these purely hypothetical concepts and not finding them. Science cannot remain in that state for long, and therefore it's called the last stand of dark matter, dark energy. And so essentially the new God's physics paradigm does and did something very similar, equivalent to what Einstein did. It discarded dark matter, dark energy. It offers an alternative explanation for the accelerated expansion of the universe, which has to do with this singular higher ordered universal consciousness or computational principle. Essentially, it's telling us that for every frame, subsequent frame that the universal consciousness or computational principle is computing, it's enlarging the frame, and there are specific instances or intervals, time intervals, which have to do with the collective human consciousness focus of millions of human beings focusing on this universal conscious reality, such as the Jewish Rosh Hashanah 2-day New Year time interval, in which millions of Jews are focusing and praying to God, or in scientific terms, focusing on this universal conscious reality. And the hypothesis is, or the postulate is, that due to this focus, collective human consciousness focus on the universal consciousness principle, i.e. God, there then occurs a non-continuous increase in the rate of the universe's expansion for the subsequent year. in the case of the Jewish Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, so the new God's physics paradigm was able to resolve the apparent contradiction between relativity theory and quantum mechanics by discovering this singular higher ordered universal conscious reality, and B, has been able to discard dark matter, dark energy, in other words, explain in a different way, satisfactory manner, the phenomenon of dark matter, dark energy, which has been a major problem for the old paradigm. And then the major turning point, which we've just passed, is the validation of a unique critical prediction of God's physics new paradigm, which I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, relating both to the non-continuous accelerated rate of the universe expansion. There is a gap, what I call the cosmological astronomical gap in the universe's expansion rate. Essentially, when scientists and cosmologists and astronomers look at the rate at which the universe is expanding, and they compare that rate between, let's say, the early stages of the universe, the background radiation close to the assumed Big Bang initiation of the universe. In brackets, by the way, the new God's physics paradigm challenges the Big Bang model. Perhaps I'll mention that. But in any event, when we compare the background radiation cosmological measurement of the initial stage of the universe, and we compare that to the current rate of acceleration of the universe, the astronomical measure, we find a gap, and we find that it's an unexplained gap. It's something that cannot be explained by relativity theory, the old paradigm, and that gap essentially says that as we move forward in time, the rate is now increasing all the time in a increasing over a period of time. So that non-continuous accelerated rate of the universe's expansion is a verification or validation of a unique critical prediction of God's physics paradigm, which is not the same or different than the prediction of relativity theory, which cannot explain that gap. And the second validation had to do with the proton radius puzzle. That is an instant or a prediction predicted by God's physics paradigm, which on the subatomic realm shows that the prediction of God's physics paradigm is more valid than the predictions of quantum mechanics. I won't get into that right now. I explained that in previous presentations. But the point of the matter is that we've reached a point that science now realizes and has validated and is accepting the new God's physics paradigm as the new, valid, more satisfactory, more exhaustive new paradigm, scientific paradigm for 21st century physics, which is more valid and includes as a special case the old, what I call material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. So that's a very exciting development in science. And now I want to connect this to God's physics' new portrayal of the universe and of human existence and role within that new universe, which leads us to the RASHBIs and to the Rebbis and to the inner teachings of the Torah and Chassidus about the real reality underlying the universe and the purpose of human life, the purpose of the whole evolution of the universe. Excuse me. So I want to mention now, so that we understand the new portrayal of the universe and this new profound change in our understanding of the universe, which really opens our eyes, opens humanity's and science's eyes to realize a completely different and profound new understanding of the universe. To do that, I want to mention again two profound postulates of this new God's physics paradigm. One postulate has to do with what I call the computational invariance principle. And the computational invariance principle essentially tells us that if we are contrasting now between the reality or the validity of two different aspects of the universe. One of them is this singular higher order universal consciousness / computational principle, UCP, and the other is the physical universe with its four physical features of space, time, energy, and mass. When we compare these two and we see that the UCP exists both during the frames, in fact it's assumed and it's delineated in what manner this singular higher ordered UCP is computing simultaneously every pixel, every point in the universe. It's computing every point, every atom every molecule, every cell in our body, every planet, every glass, every stone and a grass blade, everything in the universe, every pixel in the universe, it's computing simultaneously every pixel in the universe, creating each time this universal frame, which dissolves into the UCP, then a larger universal frame, etc. So the idea is that when we see that the UCP is in fact creating the universe and computing every atom, every point, every pixel in the universe, so it exists during the frame. It's actually the thing or the principle that's animating and recreating and computing, creating every pixel in the universe. It exists during the frames, universal frames, and it also exists in between the frames. Remember that according to this new God's physics paradigm, the whole universe dissolves back into the UCP in between the frames. So the UCP exists both during the frames, it's creating the whole universe, and it also exists in between the frames, in which the universe and the whole physical, the four physical features of the universe of space, time, energy, and mass, they dissolve. So the computational variance principle is telling us something very profound. It's telling us that since the UCP exists both during the frames and also in between the frames, as opposed to the physical universe and the atoms and the molecules and the cells of our bodies, the planets, the plants, everything. So the physical universe with its four physical features, it only exists during the frames as being created totally and entirely dependent on the UCP. But the physical universe with the four physical features of space, time, energy, and mass, they dissolve in between the frames. They cease to exist. They dissolve into this UCP. So the computational variance principle is telling us something very profound, simple yet profound. Einstein, the great scientist, told us that truth is something so simple that we should be able to explain it to a 3-year-old girl or boy. So this profound discovery is very simple, elegant, but very profound. The principle, the computational variance principle, is telling us that since the UCP exists in between frames and during the frames, but the universe, the physical universe with all the atoms and all the four physical features of space, time, energy, and mass, they exist, the universe exists only during the frame but not in between the frame, and it's created by the UCP. Therefore, the computational variance principle is telling us there's only one reality, one real reality, singular reality, which is this universal consciousness principle or reality. And associated with this is the second postulate, which is called the universal conscious reality. And it's telling us, it's developing that new understanding even more so. It's telling us that since only the UCP, universal consciousness principle or computational principle, exists both during the frames and in between the frames, and that the universe really exists only transiently, the whole universe that we see and we're so enamored by or impressed by, this universe which seems so real to us, exists only for a trillionth of a second. In the universal computational formula at the heart of this new God's physics paradigm, it appears at the lower part of the book. So the universal computational formula unifies the four basic physical features, and it shows how this UCP is computing for every universal frame, every pixel in the universe. And in that formula, implied is the rate at which this universal consciousness principle or reality is producing the universe, is creating the universe. And it's telling us that it happens at such an incredible rate of trillions of times per second. Trillions of times per second, this UCP or universal consciousness reality is creating the universe and dissolving it back to itself, creating the universe and dissolving it back to itself, and evolving it. So the universal consciousness reality, second profound postulate, is telling us that really the the universe is only a transient phenomenal manifestation of the universal conscious reality. That really there only exists this universal consciousness reality, this singular higher ordered universal consciousness reality. Again, in religious terms we would call it God. That universal consciousness reality is the only real reality that exists behind the universe, above and transcending the universe. But the universe is only a manifestation, a transient phenomenal manifestation of this universal conscious reality. And that's an amazing discovery or profound a new understanding of science and humanity's understanding of the universe, because we start realizing the universe is not material. The universe is not a solid material reality. It doesn't exist continuously. It doesn't exist as a solid, continuous material reality. By the way, there's no cause and effect. That's another profound implication of this new acausal computational paradigm. Because if everything is created simultaneously, then there cannot be cause and effect. One more time, again, I'll give the metaphor that if we saw a film, we saw a depiction of a hammer, in this case the cell phone, hitting a glass cup with tea, and it being shattered and the tea being spilled over the table, it seems like there's cause and effect. But really, when we slow down the progression of the film and we see that in every frame they appear simultaneously, they're just being presented closer and closer, even when they're touching each other, and in all the other frames they're being presented at the same time, simultaneously. If they're being presented simultaneously at the same time, that means there cannot be cause and effect between them. So really, the producer of the film is just depicting a series of frames in which the proximity is getting closer and closer, then the cup is shattered, etc. That means that the new God's physics paradigm is telling us what seems to the naked eye as cause and effect is not really a cause and effect. It's an arrangement of the series of universal frames in such a manner that gives us the impression of certain laws of nature, laws of physics, but the real reality behind this apparent causal relationship is the universal conscious reality, and it is actually arranging the whole progression of the universal frames or the evolution of the universe in a pre-planned manner to reach the ultimate goal. I gave the metaphor that in the same way that King Solomon, we cannot fathom a situation that King Solomon would summon the builders, construction builders of the Immaculate Divine Temple. He wouldn't summon them to start building the temple without initially or beforehand having the ultimate completed blueprint of the completed temple, and also of all the stages to reach that completed universal the temple. And the metaphor, the analogy would be that in the same way that King Solomon would not start building the temple before he has the completed blueprint plan and illustration of the completed temple, same way the universal consciousness reality, i.e. God, has and has had a blueprint plan, so to speak, of the whole evolution of the universe towards the ultimate goal, which is the Geulah perfected state. So the whole universe has been planned, pre-planned, and evolved, and is being governed and evolved all the time by this universal conscious reality, i.e. God, towards the ultimate goal for which the whole universe was created. That's the Geulah perfected state. And so now is a good time to speak about this Geulah perfected state from a scientific standpoint. The Geulah perfected state is a perfected moral, spiritual, and even physical state in which the whole of humanity, through science as well, would realize that there exists only this singular, higher ordered universal conscious reality, i.e. God. In other words, the whole progression of the universe has been planned to reach that perfected state of the universe of Geulah. And excitingly, we are now actually entering that phase of Geulah, even from a scientific standpoint, which then opens the eyes of the whole of humanity to realize that we are inseparable from this universal conscious reality. Let me mention a few other things that are related to this Geulah perfected state. One more thing that is actually a major principle in this new God's physics paradigm is what I call the dynamic equilibrium moral principle. And the dynamic equilibrium moral principle essentially tells us that, by the way, follows or is very similar, actually, amazingly similar to a principle that Maimonides discovered, the Rambam. And the Rambam tells us that every Jewish person, and broader, every human being, has to view themselves as standing on the scales the tipping scales, and every small moral action, positive action, good action that we take tilts the whole scale of the whole universe towards positivity, towards Geulah, and vice versa. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, the head of the Jewish people, Melech HaMashiach, is telling us that every small mitzvah that we're making, every small good action and commandment and injunction, every mitzvah that we're making brings us closer and closer to Geulah. And in fact, as I said, the Rebbe is telling us that the Geulah is here already, that we all only have to open our eyes and see it. And in a sense, that's the essence of today's talk and God's physics whole theory, is for humanity, for science and humanity, to realize that we are in Geulah, that the whole universe has been progressing towards the perfected Geulah state, and that sciences and God's physics empirical validation, what I mentioned earlier, indicates that science is now entering Geulah. Science is now pointing at the singular higher ordered existence, soul existence, real existence of this universal conscious reality. So about the moral principle, same way that the Rambam, or somewhat equivalent to what the Rambam was telling us about any good deed that we're making tilts ourselves and the whole world towards positivity and goodness, and vice versa. The new God's physics paradigm is teaching us through the dynamic equilibrium moral principle. It's teaching us that at every point in time, every moral action that we're making has tremendous ramifications, because the claim is, the hypothesis is, that this universal higher ordered, singular higher ordered universal conscious reality possesses what I call a multi-spatial temporal reservoir, a bank of all the frames, all the history of the past universal frames, of the universe's past, of present universal frame, that's the present, and of multiple possible universal frames, multiple possible futures, universal frames of the universe. And that when any human being makes a moral choice, for example, I gave in the God's Physics book an example in which we had a CEO driving to an annual board meeting in which he or she are expected to receive an annual big prize, financial prize. And on their way, they see, God forbid, a car accident with a person injured lying on the ground. And assuming or given that CEO has the knowledge and know-how, and assesses the situation, that it's safe and it's appropriate to evacuate that person in his car to the nearest hospital, they have a moral choice to make. They can call in and cancel or postpone that meeting, in which case the claim is, according to the dynamic equilibrium moral principle, the universal conscious reality will select for that individual human being a future, one of multiple possible futures, in which their life will be saved, or somebody else will try to save their life, and vice versa. So the moral principle now is becoming a major element, a major principle within God's physics' new scientific paradigm of 21st century science and physics. And the moral principle is actually now telling us that our choices, and moral choices at every point in time, really determine by the universal conscious reality one of multiple possible futures for each one of us. And implied in it, by the way, and this would connect to the Geulah state and to the profound characteristics of this universal conscious reality, i.e. God, and that is that even in cases in which a human being, let's say, makes a less moral choice, for example, that CEO decided, well, I don't have time for that, somebody else will take care of it. Obviously only the person and God knows what the real moral choice that we're making is. But let's say that CEO makes a less moral choice, and even if the universal conscious reality then is selecting for that CEO or that individual human being future in which they would have to experience a situation similar to their moral choice. First of all, that from God's physics perspective is not a punishment. That's really a way of the universal construality to open our eyes and realize that we're inseparable from each other. We're inseparable from God or from the universal construality. Excuse me. And by the way, in the God's physics new paradigm, there exists what I call 10 hierarchical computational dimensions. Excuse me. And these 10 hierarchical computational dimensions in which depict the manner in which the universal construality is computing at every trillionth of a second the next universal frame, including all the pixels of every human being and all the moral balances and situations, etc. So one of these 10 hierarchical computational dimensions also is Teshuva, again a Jewish term denoting the possibility of every human being to make a conscious remorse and a conscious decision not to repeat immoral actions. And if a person does Teshuva, then the computation of that less positive, quote unquote, or that future in which the human being that inflicted pain would have to experience that equivalent pain, if they make Teshuva, then that frame would be omitted and changed. So we understand that the whole God's physics new scientific paradigm includes the moral principle and is really geared towards opening our eyes and seeing that we're inseparable from the universal construality or from each other. And I gave the metaphor again of a balanced, mentally balanced human being that would not take their right hand and inflict pain on their left hand because it's part of themselves. Same way, in a sense, the moral principle is teaching us, is opening our eyes to see and realize that we're inseparable from this universal construality, we're inseparable from each other, we're all part of this universal construality, therefore we cannot and should not inflict pain on each other. In fact, we should help each other, we should respect each other, we should treat each other with love and respect and goodwill, etc. And this leads us now to the Geulah perfected state, and to opening our eyes and realizing that we're in Geulah, that we should live and realize and understand the universe and our special role as human beings within this perfected Geulah state. Because one more thing about this higher ordered, singular higher ordered universal construality, i.e. God, according to this scientific new paradigm, the universal construality is typified, is characterized by certain characteristics, such as all goodness, such as morality, such as peace and harmony, such as steering the whole universe towards the perfected Geulah state. This is important because now, as we've discussed, science has verified and has validated the new God's physics paradigm as more valid than the older paradigm, the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. That being the case, that means then that the new God's physics paradigm is pointing at the fact that science and humanity we've now reached a point that science is telling us there's only one reality. That one reality is this singular higher ordered universal construality, which is again characterized by all goodness, by morality, by peace and harmony. That's the only reality that really exists. That we human beings are, in a sense, partners, are asked and educated and brought to the state, to the perfected Geulah state, in which we realize through the dynamic equilibrium moral principle that we're inseparable from each other, that we have to treat each other with respect and goodwill and love. That's the realization of the new God's physics paradigm, and that's a very good place or point to now speak about the RASHBI, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's call and realization and instruction to the Jewish people and to the whole world, and especially on this holy day of the RASHBI's passing. And it's, as I said earlier, it's an amazing and very optimistic, in a sense, sign that we're celebrating the RASHBI's passing, because the RASHBI asked the Jewish people to celebrate his understanding, his profound discovery, which is part of an integral part of the Torah, what's been given to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, and that is the oneness of creation, our inseparability from this singular God, divine reality. It is said about the RASHBI that he realized that he's inseparable from God, and all of his teachings, inner wisdom and inner light of the Torah, which again has been given to Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and has been passed on, and now is actually from the RASHBI, from the Arizal, and through the Lubavitcher Rebbe and all the heads of the Jewish people leading to the Rebbe, that knowledge about the oneness of creation, our inseparability from God, or from this universal consciousity. So we're at the point, especially on this very holy day, and following the Rebbe's calling and teaching, that Geulah is here, that we only have to open our eyes and see that. When we start realizing that the world is not made up of atoms, atoms exist very transiently, and as we said, based on the computational variance principle, atoms are really a manifestation, a transient manifestation of this universal conscious reality. When we open our eyes, we walk in the world and we start realizing that the world is not material, the world is really divine. The world, and that's exactly what the RASHBI is teaching us. That's exactly what the head of the Jewish people, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, is teaching us. That's exactly what the Chassidus is teaching us, and that's what science, God's physics, is teaching us right now. That is that the world is not material. The world is a constant process or manifestation of this divine, higher, singular reality, the universal conscious reality, or God. Same thing, called in different names. But when we realize that there's only one singular higher ordered reality, divine reality, that reality is creating, sustaining, evolving the universe. That reality has pre-planned and is taking care and watching and evolving the universe, is remembering every hair in our beard, every small cell in our body, every bird, every planet, every grass blade. Everything is being sustained and is a manifestation of this universal conscious reality. That opens our eyes, because we start realizing that the universe is not material, it's not causal, it's really divine. The universe is a manifestation of this universal conscious reality, or God. That universal conscious reality, or God, is all goodness. It cares about every human being, every animal, every plant. It cares about the evolution of the universe and opening our eyes, because we are at the Geulah state, in which we open our eyes and we realize everything around us is a manifestation of this universal conscious reality, or God. Everything is a creation of God, or the universal conscious reality. The universal conscious reality, or God, is all goodness. And we are instructed, we are encouraged, we are opening our eyes and realizing that based on the moral principle, our actions make a huge difference in the world. That if we have to act in a moral and in a goodwill manner towards each other. We cannot act in a violent manner. The crisis that we see in Ukraine today, by the way, is a manifestation of humanity crying out and revolting against any type of aggression. That will pass from the world, because it cannot exist when humanity and science realizes that every small action that we make has a ramification for ourselves and for the universe. When we start realizing that the universe operates not by a mere random cause and effect. The universe was not created by a random nuclear Big Bang event. The universe is being created, evolved, cared for in Hasidic thought, and now it enters science. There is a term called personal providence, Hashgacha Pratit. We realize that the whole universe is being watched over and cared and evolved and balanced and evolved towards the perfected Geulah state by the response reality or God. So this is a very exciting time and very holy time during the RASHBI's Lag BaOmer passing celebration, in which the RASHBI, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is calling us to open our eyes and see the reality, see that everything is part of God or the response reality, that we have a very special role, an important role to play in opening our eyes and manifesting this Geulah perfected state. I'd like to dedicate this lecture also Leilui Nishmat Tirza Bat Yitzchak, my dear mother, and also to my aunt Rachel Bat Yosef. Thank you very much.